Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new edition of True Crime with the Sarge. I'm your host, Joseph Giacalone, and with us tonight, retired Phoenix Police Sergeant and cold case investigator Troy Hillman. He's the author of Chasing Down the Zombie Hunter, the true story of a small-town accountant and an elite group of detectives, and Arizona's most terrifying cold case. Troy, welcome to the show. It's good to talk to you.
Thank you for having me on, Joe. Appreciate it.
Yes, so this has actually been kind of exciting because I always love talking to fellow cold case sergeants. I tell everybody it's the best job in the police department because these are the most challenging cases. Did you kind of feel the same way about that?
Yeah, it was the most 10 years of my career. It was the most intense and just all kinds of riddled with challenges.
Yeah, no, I mean, and talk about like never giving up, right? So how many obstacle after obstacle. So we're going to get into your case in a little while, but you had a pretty unique background. Well, some people might think it was a unique background, but I always tell my students at the FBI, if you want to go straight into the FBI, you have to either be a CPA or a lawyer. So you were an accountant, right?
Yeah, I was working for a big accounting firm in Chicago, and that was kind of laid out. My career was to be a partner in a CPA firm. And so when I ended up quitting and resigning, basically to become a police officer, they thought I was nuts. And they literally, the managing partner said, we've never had anybody resign to go become a police officer.
Right. I mean, they would probably say, like, what are you, out of your mind, right? I mean, you got a nice, comfortable job. But let me explain to the audience, though, your skill set that you have as an accountant, how does that carry over into detective work?
Yeah, accountants are known for being very organized, very, very detail oriented. And that really parlayed into detective work in terms of you really have to get down, especially with cold cases, get down in the details to make sure you don't miss anything and kind of look over what possibly was missed in the past. So and you're talking volumes and volumes of reams of paper, just volumes of information, that files and photos and stuff. So definitely that CPA came into play. And as the sergeant, I kind of got the role to organize the squad and to figure out, kind of handpick detectives and then figure out how to deploy them according to their background best, because we had, I know this pales in comparison probably to New York, but we had 2,500 cold cases. And they gave me a number when I took over the squad. They said, we think 2,500. I'm like, as an accountant, I was like, what do you mean you think? I'm like, can't we come up with a solid number? That drove me nuts. And that became kind of my passion to figure out exactly how many solved cases we had, how many unsolved cases we had, inventory for an accountant purposes.
Right. And that's generally the first step, right? So you come in there, you want to see what you have, right? And
Right.
now, how did the Phoenix Police Department actually define a cold case? Did it go by time? Did it go by hot leads, or what was the definition for them?
Well, Joe, there actually was no definition. It was kind of when somebody would leave the unit, either retiring, maybe promoting, something. They would give their cases and they just turn them over to the cold case queue. So there are all these cases in this. It was my queue of cases. That was just massive, and they were both unsolved and solved in there. So it was a mess. And we went in and we decided, okay, we're going to go off of best practice. So we implemented a policy that anything at the 1 year mark from the date of the incident and there are no viable leads became a cold case. And then that kind of gave us jurisdiction within the homicide unit to go ahead and review it and kind of take it over, so to speak, without stepping on too many toes.
Yeah, I know all about that. Yeah, even with that though, they still. But let me take one more look at it. Right, you get that kind of pushback sometimes.
Yeah, I was told at one point we were reviewing so many cases and we were trying to be nice, but we were finding some things that were some serious items that were missed on certain detectives. Not all the detectives, but certain ones were seemed to be repeat offenders. And I was told at one point that we might want to start wearing a bulletproof vest inside of the unit, and that was kind of scary. It was a joke, but to me, it was the first time that anybody with Phoenix PD had looked over their cases, and other than maybe banter with their sergeant about what was going on with the case, nobody had actually reviewed it and kind of critiqued it, I guess, of a sort. You weren't trying to point blame, but you were trying to get up to speed and say, hey, from an outsider perspective, what can be done? How can we move this case forward? And again, there's lots of ego, as you ran into, you alluded to. There's lots of, hey, this is mine. How dare you come in and tell me how to run my case, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I mean we'll get into all the hot spots about even within internally about how difficult these cases can get. But could you explain to us what your preferred method was about re-examining a case? So when you went to go on a hunt for a case, what was some of your parameters that you look for?
Well, we just developed a review system and a kind of a solvability index score from 1 to 4, 4 being the highest, very good, which basically was a case that we just needed to do a few things and then take it over to the county attorney's office and get it charged. 1 was very poor, and those cases were maybe a gang infested neighborhood, happened at night, nobody's talking, there's 1 shell casing, there's no evidence, and it's just kind of, unfortunately, there's just nothing to go on. So we were just reviewing by decade, and we had some grants come in, luckily, and we were trying to hone that review system. And people say, well, what's a review? And I would say, well, it's a 10 to 15, maybe a 20-page synopsis or the equation of a cliff notes of a case that you could talk intelligently about it without actually printing out this massive homicide investigation. So we relied on those heavy, and what we did was we tried to archive them so that when family members would call in, we would just say, hey, Detective Smith reviewed it, and this is what he found. And then that way we wouldn't have to do it. If it was a very poor case, we would, periodically, I would always tell the family members, we're not going to get rid of the evidence. We're not going to give up on the case. But we, unfortunately, with this many cases, we got to move on, and we got to concentrate on the higher solvability ones. So to me, the bread and butter was the review system. And I felt like that ended up starting as a kind of a 1-page review, and then it blossomed into this kind of cliff note of you could talk intelligently about the case to, like I said, family members, to the lab, to county attorneys, that kind of thing.
Right now, so how many people in the overall unit did you have initially? I mean, you didn't build your team like overnight, right? So you had to go and I guess pick. We're going to get into that. Like, what did you use when you were looking for personnel? What kind of skill sets were you looking at?
When I took over in 2008, we had 2 detectives and me. And again, 2,500 cases, that's almost mission impossible with 1,250 each. And it was very antiquated to where a family member would call in and say, what's the status of my case? I'd assign it to one of the detectives, or I would look at it. We'd print it all out, we'd review it, get back to the loved one, and then we'd shred everything, and then we'd do it again in a year. So that was the key for the review process, is we could archive it. But we slowly were able, and it was solely based on seniority. And unfortunately, you had somewhat burnout detectives, retired on duty, I call them, that basically, not all of them, but that's how we were getting people to the squad or to the unit. So we decided to have a testing process where you had to basically demonstrate that you were passionate, hardworking, and we opened it up to some other areas: robbery, assaults. Other detectives could put in for it as long as they had that kind of violent crime experience. I wanted the passion. I wanted the bulldog mentality, rather than somebody that was just going to come over and spread around papers and do nothing all day. So that was what we looked for.
Right. Yeah. Some look at this as a retirement home, right? They go in this right before they go
Right.
out the door. And it really isn't. It's like it's more work than just being in a regular squad.
Yeah, I mean, there's always calls, and there's always, even on the cases that are closed, we would have to go and chaperone it through court and help if the detective was retired, that kind of thing. So we had an enormous responsibility. We also were managing a criminal apprehension team that was extraditing subjects from Mexico. So, I mean, we had our hands in a lot of things, not to mention the public records requests that were coming in on, how thousands of cases. So it was mission challenging for sure.
Yeah. No, actually, our name in our unit was very similar. It was the cold case apprehension squad. So that's what we were. That was our real title that we had in the thing, but it just, cold case squad for short. But yeah, the apprehension thing, because we had international cases and we had all kinds of stuff that was going on. And a lot of people don't understand the intricacies of these cases. I mean, they're open for a reason. right? I mean, it's generally the variety of reasons. I mean, investigator issues, right? Lack of evidence, like you had mentioned before. But I mean, the list goes on and on.
Well, and a lot of the cases that we were particularly excited about were the 80s and 90s before the advent of DNA. DNA, as you know, was a game changer. And then all the stuff that it's evolved to the point where now we're doing the genetic genealogy, we're doing, the familial testing, we're doing all these neat things. They're doing MVAC, they're getting touch DNA. They're just doing so many things that so you really need to go back and look at those cases and say, is there any new technology that we can apply? And that was kind of we had a very good relationship with our crime lab to where we could just get on the horn and call them and say, hey, what do you think? We'd have meetings with them, we'd collaborate, and that to me that was part of our success. And we were knocking out 12 to 15 cold cases a year dating back to the 70s, and so I was pretty excited about that.
Yeah, that's nice. I mean, you must have a very good DA to deal with, because a lot of our cases, I mean, the DAs were just like absolutely awful. But yeah, the DA, people don't realize it too, right? So you got to present your case after you come out with your probable cause. You still had to go to the district attorney out there.
Yeah, we call them county attorneys here, the way it's set up. But yeah, same thing. And basically, you had to usually staff it. But we had two awesome cold case prosecutors, and they were hungry, and they'd seen a lot of these cases, so they're very experienced, and they wanted to they were willing to take them on and not worry about losing, which is sometimes a challenge with the prosecutor because they don't want a bad win or on their record, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, a lot of people don't realize that. You're on the same team, but you have different goals. You want to
Right.
make the arrest and close the case, and they want to get the conviction, even if it's a plea deal, and that's how they move
Exactly.
on. Yeah, even after all the work you put in. So you built this investigative team. So you have one person that is named or dubbed the PhD, right? The interview the PhD guy, and you have a DNA expert. What else did you have on your team?
So we had Mary Ann was the passionate one. Everybody like she just was a bulldog, but everybody loved her, and the mothers especially because she was just so good at explaining what was going on, which is sometimes lacking with detectives. And we had a one gentleman who was named Dominic, who was referred to himself as the Dominator. He knew everybody on the department and could talk to suspects and get them to confess. He just had a way about him. And then they had the kid who looked like he was straight out of high school. But he was kind of a star running back as far as looking at cases and kind of feeding the DNA machine. So yeah, and then we had Mark Armistead, who was a phenomenal organization detective. And what these canal murders were so massive, that stuff was strewn in the homicide file room. It was in the basement. It was just all over the place. So Mark's kind of mission was to get us organized so that we wouldn't miss anything, and we could adequately pretty much go through the files without missing anything.
Right. Yeah. So generally, the first investigation is to find the case in the first place.
Yeah.
And yeah. All right. So let's get into the canal murder. So this was seen, I guess, at the time as one of Phoenix's coldest cases. Is that how it kind of gets referred to us?
Yeah, and it was definitely one of the most brutal, because and I'm sure we'll get into this, but you had nothing like it. You had so in 1992, you had a bicyclist, and then basically she was attacked along the canal, and in a relatively decent neighborhood, right next to her apartment complex. And the really horrific part was she was beheaded. Her bike was taken, and her headphones were taken. But the killer took her head, and then 10 days later threw it back in the canal. That was obviously done for shock purposes, and it did. It sent shockwaves through Phoenix. I wasn't living here at the time, but everybody that I've talked to has said that it dramatically impacted the way they lived, because they would rollerblade, they would bike, they would run along the canals, and especially the females from that point on were kind of looking over the shoulder because Phoenix PD, at no fault of their own, had no answers as to who did this awful thing to a young, vibrant woman. And then, we'll get into the second murder happened 10 months later.
Right. So we have, so the first case was Angela Brosso.
Brussels, yeah.
Now she's just, was it an evening? It happened in the evening?
Yeah, so Angela was from a small town in Pennsylvania. She had gone to DeVryan, New Jersey, and then finished up her studies in LA, and then moved over that summer prior to her death to Phoenix. And she was living with her boyfriend, fiance at the time, a gentleman by the name of Joe Krakowicki. And she just went out they had kind of a routine on Sunday nights. She'd go out for a bike ride. You know, it was November in Phoenix. It was very nice weather. The weather, the heat had kind of broken, so she had a sweatshirt on, and it was a nice time to go. And Joe normally would ride with her, but he decided it was her 22nd birthday the next day, so he decided to bake her a cake and stay back at the apartment. And so she would come home 30 minutes later. They'd watch In Living Color, which was big at the time. Again, they had that routine. So, and she never made it back.
Yeah, no, I mean, so you just go out on your own like many people do, and there's something terrible happens. Now, when you chose this case, was it because of the significance of what was going on, or this was just something that everyone had talked about, kind of in the Phoenix Police Department?
I think it was pretty much. I hate to say it, but I think a lot of people had given up, and they were just hanging their hats on the fact that you had two horrific murders. You had the one in 92 of Angela, and you had 93 Melanie, and then you had nothing afterwards. So you horrific, and then nothing. And so it went in the DNA system in the late 90s, the national database, and the unknown male profile never hit. So I think there was a lot of conjecture that, hey, he's dead. Move on. You've got 2,500 other cases to really work. But I remember getting a media request on this case, and I printed it all out. I got yelled at by the commander's secretary because she said, Sergeant Hillman, you just burned like X amount of toner in the printers. You went through X amount of reams of paper. And she said, what are you doing? And I said, I just printed out the Canal Murders. And so it took me a long time to work my way through them. And I kind of was scratching my head, and I'm like, how do we not know who this guy is? I'm like, because this is a serial killer. This guy's extremely dangerous. It said in the FBI profile, killer would not stop. And it was kind of like, well, where the hell did he go? Like, can we rest our hats on he's dead? To me, it was like, even if he is dead, I'd sure like to know what else he did. So we decided to kind of construct this team. I knew, even as a CPA, I initially thought, I'm organized. I'll go back. I'll look, see something that maybe nobody else saw, and maybe I can solve it. And I was a fool for thinking that. And so we constructed this elite team, and they all had their quirks, and they all kind of worked together, which was, to me, in homicide, a lot of, once you went on the initial call out, there wasn't a lot of camaraderie afterwards. It was kind of like you're on your own. So to have us come together as a team and work it was kind of was special.
Right. No, I mean, when everything starts to come together, though, it does get kind of exciting. You try to explain that to people, as you're doing it. So did you, so everything was a paper case, I'm assuming, right? Did you have to scan it in? Did you get it digitized, or was that part of the plan yet, or no?
Yeah, I mean, the list of suspects was in kind of all over the place. So luckily, Mark, the organization detective, was able to get an Excel spreadsheet, and we called it the Creepy Canal List because it was just chocked full of creepy dudes. So we kind of took that angle, and we looked at the original reports and said, who did we miss? This 92 and 93, this is pre-DNA. DNA didn't get going until the mid-90s, to where they could even do a comparison to say for sure that these cases were related. And then in the late, I think it was 99 or 2000, it went into the FBI CODIS database. So, to me, there was just so many challenges. The photos were 35 millimeter. We had to get them developed, and there were hundreds of photos. But you'd have one person's shoe holding up, one woman holding up a shoe, and you'd be like, well, how does that photo fit in? There was no really key or legend to how the photos, and they were just kind of, not that they did a bad job, they did the best job they could, but it was just all over the place. So trying to get our hands on all these different, there were different reports too. We did it in our department. I'm not sure how NYPD did it, but we had if it was a related report, we would do an A report, a B report, a C report. So say that, there'd be a missing person, and then there'd be a homicide and a sexual assault. And so trying to figure out all the information scattered amongst those various reports was difficult. So it was just, it was a mess.
Yeah, pretty labor intensive just getting the case together in that respect and doing all the thing. Now, when you went through the case, did you have a specific plan, so to speak? So you had this huge case, you're finding all these pieces everywhere. Did you separate the reports? Did you, did you put the evidence in one pile? The, potential suspects, like you said, you already had a list in Excel spreadsheet and so forth. Is that how you guys kind of broke it down?
Yeah, the original report, the first goal was to figure out, are there any creepy subjects, we call them creepy, in this persons of interest that we missed, that we need to get their DNA? And we found several, and we had to go travel to several states. And a lot of people think with cold case, it's easy. But first of all, you have to convince your chain of command. Second of all, you have to figure out what that jurisdiction needs as far as we have a lower threshold here in Arizona to get somebody's DNA than, say, other states. So the states that we went to, I think it was Maryland, had higher thresholds. So to go back on a decades-old cold case and say, hey, we need to detain this subject and get their DNA, we had to meet that threshold and convince a judge that we needed to do it. So there were just these hurdles of going, and then you'd spend a lot of money sending detectives to these various places, cooperating. Other jurisdictions were awesome to deal with, but you still had to have them on board. So it was very labor intensive. And again, we were just plucking off during the whole investigation. This whole investigation took us about 3.5 years, but we took well over 20 of these where we ended up tracking them down, getting their DNA. And we were excited about it. It was kind of that roller coaster ride of, hey, Kelly in the lab, here's the DNA off of this perp, and here's why we like him. Only to get the call and say, it's not him. And that it was hard to recover from after. It was almost like body blow, punch to the face, body blow. And after a while, you just, 3.5 years, you kind of absorb so many of those that you're just kind of numb, and you're kind of questioning, hey, are we going to solve this? Were we fools? Everybody seems to think he's dead. Maybe we are fools. Maybe we'll never solve this thing.
Right. So you guys now, you got all this, you got the DNA, goes in the system, no hit. You just keep on going on, but you got to I guess you got to just put it on the side, right? And see if something develops. Is that how this whole thing goes down?
Well, we became kind of obsessed about it. We weren't neglecting any of our other 2,500 cases, but we were still, I in particular had a file, and I was scouring the internet for cases because we had some definitive clues. Both girls had their shoes and socks left on. There were certain carvings. There was stuff done in the tunnel. And I'll leave that for the book to get into. But basically, we were looking at all these clues, trying to figure out, what was he trying to tell us? So we really were driving at that. And every as you know, as a sergeant kind of can kind of get to play sometimes, so to speak, meaning you're usually doing performance ratings, you're doing these boring tasks of notes, and you're trying to making sure your detectives have what they need. But getting in the weeds and being a detective is the fun part. So in this particular investigation, I really jumped in the weeds and was helping. So, it was just a hell of a ride in terms of the ups and downs. We did go back and we met a group in Philadelphia that I'm pretty sure you're aware of, or you've probably heard of because they're just close to you, the Vidocq Society out of Philadelphia.
Yep.
And they were, they welcomed us with open arms, but they're a tough group because they're very brilliant, and there's a lot of even amongst them there was a lot of I guess not conflict, but just one person would think this, one person was a religious expert, one was a PhD of this, one was a profiler, one was NCIS, they all had their opinions, and they didn't always get along. So but they were a think tank, and they were awesome to be able to tell us, hey, you missed this, you may want to think about this, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, yes, the Vidocq Society out in Philadelphia, they don't take many cases, right? So you have to you basically pitch your case to them, correct?
Right. Yeah, and that's what we did. And we didn't really know what we were doing. And we we kind of, but we did get accepted on the Canal Murders, and we did fly back there. They'll fly 2 detectives. So Marianne and William were kind of the 2 assigned case agents, but I wanted to go too. And I asked my bosses, I'm like, hey, can I go? And they said no. And I said, well, what about if I pay? What about if I pay? And they said, okay. And I said, well, can I get some city business time? And they said, because I was going to burn vacation if I had to, but they said, no, you can go on city business. But it's just that sometimes government has that mentality of, you know, let's not think outside the box. And that's what, to me, what cold case is thinking outside the box, brainstorming and getting help from experts. That's vital to the mission.
Yeah, and this is something that many police executives don't understand either. So, I mean, if you don't have the right person in charge and they're not buying into this, it's very difficult to do, especially a case like this that's so massive and it's now going on. What is it going on? What 20 years at the time when you finally started delving into this?
Yeah, and I mean, I think they sometimes cold case is kind of the redheaded stepchild, unfortunately, of homicide. And then you're often asked to come in, and when they're getting their butts kicked on regular police officer involved shootings and or homicides, they want you to come help. And we're saying, hey, we've already got 2,500 cases and we're swamped. So, but I did have good leaders. It did take some convincing the further it went up the chain, but they were able to convince them to not only go back to Vidocq, but then and we'll get to this, to use some forensic tool that ended up kind of really giving us a hell of a good clue to send this in the right direction.
Right. So for those of you that's just joining us now, we are speaking with retired police sergeant and cold case investigator Troy Hillman. He wrote the book called The Chasing Down the Zombie Hunter, and we're talking about the Canal Murders that happened in 1992 and 1993. So just to catch you guys up that just entered the room, the numbers just started going up. So I just want to keep everybody in there. And I'm also having some issue with the chat here tonight for myself. So for those of you that I might not have seen your hello, so just want to tell everybody hi, and I hope you guys are all doing well. So other tools that you have at your disposal on these. So you ViCAP, were you tapped into them, the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program?
Yeah, we basically, they were looking for, beheadings, women that had been murdered in kind of a similar fashion, and they were a big help. But again, nothing really pointed directly towards a correlation to our killer. We had the Vidocq Society, and at one point the case kind of went international because they pointed us to some cases that happened in Germany and Denmark that were eerily similar in the early 90s. So we kind of took a look at that, and that was, just trying to go through Interpol and trying to go through this. I had a buddy at the State Department and that kind of thing. So it was, again, I can't tell you enough. It was a wild ride as far as trying to piece this all together.
I guess if you asked for a trip out to Denmark, they probably would have said no, right? You
Yeah,
got to give it a shot, though, right?
Yeah, hard no, but those cases were just bizarre, and the same kind of as ours. And it's highly probable that these serial killers can bounce around, not only between jurisdictions or states, but internationally. So we didn't want to ignore something that was, quite possibly, could be related to our cases. So you got to keep, as you got to keep a very, you can't get tunnel vision. So you have to keep very broad view.
Right. I mean, every case could be a clue into even yours, even though it might not have anything to do with it. There might be something you can learn from it or glean from it that you can then apply to yours. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. But we found that most of the time crime was local. Right. So I mean, you're dealing with somebody who's a local guy who knows these canals and knows the area, and that's basically where we would have been heading with it too.
Yeah, and one factor that we looked hard at was the military factor. We believed this guy, our killer, was very proficient because he very quickly was able to overtake 2 very strong athletic women in basically a blitz attack, stabbed them in the exact same place in the back, incapacitate them, and then he spent hours with them and nobody really had any substantial witness of these events. So to me, we kind of look towards special forces and somebody that's very good at the, unfortunately, I have to say, the craft of killing. That's not to malign, the military, but as we've known, sometimes there are people in positions of power that go sideways. So we were looking at that hardcore, and I think we have an Air Force base out here, Luke Air Force Base, that's not that far from the scene. So we had to keep that in mind, that there could be a military connection, and that's what we focused on.
Yeah, no, anything and everything's on the table, right? At this point, I mean, you're just trying to make something out of nothing, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, if there were other crimes, in other counties with women with the shoes and socks and murdered, and there were religious things that happened in our murders. So to me, we were looking at that angle. So yeah, you got to just look at every single angle, and you just don't know. But you also could be wasting your time.
Now, were there other kinds of crimes or homeless encampments in around these canals at all, or no? I'm not so familiar with Phoenix. I've been there, but I never really, went into this kind of area. Is that an issue in these?
Yeah, it's gotten it's progressively, it's gotten worse of late, because there's so many people moving to Phoenix, and nobody's really addressed the homeless issue and or the drug issue. So there are lots, but back then there were, but it wasn't as prevalent. And there were a lot of people that used those canals, I think I alluded to earlier, that were rollerblading, biking, hiking, walking. They just used them, and for him to be able to attack, and then again get away with it, just is kind of, to this day, mind-boggling.
Now, without giving away all the secrets of the book, because we don't want to do that. We want people to pick up a copy of Chasing Down the Zombie Hunter. How does this guy? So you get FIGG, right? So you bring in forensic investigative genetic genealogy. I had Colleen Fitzpatrick on.
Yeah, love Colleen.
Yeah, she was one of the individuals that turned me on to you, as well as Jill from the Murder Bookshelf podcast. So big shout out to those two. But yeah, so how does this all come about now that you get the the genetic and genealogy into play here?
So we were 3 years into the case, and again, that roller coaster ride was starting to. I referred to it earlier: the body blows, the headshots. We were just getting tired, and we got a call. It was actually I was forwarded a voicemail from one of my detectives, Marianne, and she basically said, "Boss, I don't really know what to do with this voicemail. So here you go." And it was kind of a funny. We laughed about it later, because I played the message, and a woman said, it's Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick. And keep in mind, this is 2014. The investigative genetic genealogy has taken off, and really a lot of people, I think, credit California authorities used it on the Golden State Killer in 2018. But it was, I always say, Phoenix PD were kind of pioneers, because we used it in 2014 with Dr. Fitzpatrick 4 years prior. And I think they heard about it from us. It doesn't matter. They're both awful human beings, the people we arrested, but I always believe in giving credit where credit's due. At Phoenix PD,
somebody's got to give you a pat on the back, right? You might as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was awesome. And so she basically said, I just want to talk to your squad. I want to talk to, I'm giving a presentation at the Biltmore. We're like, okay. So we sent 2 detectives to pick her up. We had our lab meet her, because we had never heard of the application of genealogy to cold cases and or any murders. It just, to me, just seemed bizarre. And so we started, she came in, gave a presentation, and she has a PhD from Duke. I think you probably, in physics. She's like a extremely bright woman and brilliant. And she basically confused the hell out of us, but managed to convince us that we needed to use her on the Canal Murders. But I knew, being a sergeant for over a decade, about 17 years, that if they did it on the house, if she would do it on the house, then we could get it approved quick. But if she charged $1, that it would be marred in red tape, and the bureaucrats would kind of step in and say, "Wait, we're spending money on who and why?" So we sent 2 detectives with her to kind of say, "Hey, Colleen, is there any way you do this for free? Because we think it's such a massive case that this might make your career and really pop." And she said, "It's my time, and I need, and she's a professional. She needs to get paid. So we kind of work that angle of, hey, is there any way, just because we know the government side of how long this is going to take to get approved. So we ended up waiting. We had it called Voodoo, Witchcraft, but kind of the higher ups were kind of frowning at, you guys are crazy. And at this point, I was kind of screaming, we have nothing to lose. We've been sending detectives all around the country and spending $1,500, and this is $750 to spend, and that is a speck in the budget of Phoenix. So let's just do this. We're not giving her any secrets of the case. She's going to look at it, and if we fail, we fail, but it's worth a shot. And that's what our lab said. Hey, genealogy is going to be a thing. And sure enough, I'll never forget it. I had some extended family in town, and it was right after Christmas, and I got a call from Colleen, and she said, hey, Troy, I'm going to give you the surname. And I was like, it was a pretty common surname. And his name was Miller. Surname was Miller. And I was like, well, that's not Smith, but that's kind of the seventh most common. I think I looked it up. It was the seventh most common surname in the United States at the time. So, we were kind of like, okay, that's great, but where do we go from here? And then what the profiler said in the Vidocq Society is he's going to be in your files. This guy's a Dahmer, or this guy's a Bundy, and he's going to be somewhere in your files. And we were just like, our files are massive. We just, it's going to take us forever to look at these. So she kind of fast-tracked us, and sure enough, he was in our files.
Was he in the case file as a potential suspect before he even started doing this?
Yeah, an anonymous tip had come in after the second murder. The second victim had been redressed in a smaller child's bodysuit, and there was a tip that came in that said this particular individual had been seen with that bodysuit. And they did a really nice job. They put that out to the media back then, and that's what kind of generated that tip. So I was shocked that, yes, he was there. And when I got that file, it was massive in terms of, wow, we could be onto something here.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I asked that question is because that was a trend that we found many times. And I tell detectives when I do my talks, or when I go over, I'm going to be going down to, where am I going? Virginia to do the cold case symposium down there. And I tell the detectives all the time, 9 times out of 10, your perp is in the case file.
Yep.
You just got to be able to find them and then prove it. Yeah,
they either tell somebody something maybe at a bar while drinking, an ex-wife or ex-girlfriend calls in, somebody sees something, they show up at the funeral, somewhere their name gets into the case file. But again, we had well over 800 or 1,000 names, and they were all creepy, to the point where I was telling my wife, I'm like, don't go along the canals. Obviously this guy hasn't hit for a long time, but just be careful because there's all these creepy dudes out there and this guy, so it was problematic to try to go through all those, but it worked out great with Colleen.
So yeah, Jill just entered the chat, Murder Shelf Book Club podcast. If you're not following her, make sure you go follow Jill. She's good people. So this has all been like extremely interesting. I find these cold cases rather interesting. So it's like, so when you get that notification from Colleen, what was the feeling? I know you explained exactly where you were, what we do, but how'd you feel? How did that make you feel when you got the name?
I guess I didn't know really what to think, because again, it was an extremely common name, but I had to check the files. So I burned rubber, so to speak, and hightailed it to headquarters. And I asked Mark, the organization detective, I'm like, hey, would you go down to the basement and pull the files with Miller? And he went down there, and he kind of, in his typical sarcastic manner, go, here you go. Do you want your door shut or open? And I'm like, well, shut the door, please. And because I wanted to really dig into these files. And the first couple I was looking at, no, not too excited. But then when I hit this particular file, it was file 668. I was like, wow, hair on the back of my neck stood up. It was probably ½ inch to an inch thick. And it just was very telling and reeked. I always say it reeked of a serial killer.
Now, you have to go to the district attorney to present this guy as your suspect in the case? How did that go?
Well, we needed to get his DNA. That was kind of our next step, was to do a direct comparison with his DNA to the to the samples left at the crime scene. And so that was another challenge to figure out how, and once we started to really dig in on this guy, it just blew up in terms of the interest level, because he was a Comic-Con guy. He drove around the zombie hunter vehicle. He had, a bloody mannequin in the back. He was a local celebrity. He was part of steampunk. So he just did all these interesting things. He was an actor in a small time movie. So we were like, wow, this is just, we're just, couldn't get enough of trying to learn about him. And he worked at a local Amazon distribution facility. So we didn't have our sneak and peek undercover detectives available at the time. So my detectives went out and they were kind of trying to figure out if he discarded any DNA, because every single break he would go out at Amazon and he wouldn't smoke, he wouldn't discard anything, he wouldn't drink anything. He would just sit there and listen to really loud music, and that was how he spent his break. And then he would go back in. So finally, one of my detectives, Clark, got tired of it, and then called me at home and said, "Hey, I've got a plan to get his DNA." And then the rest is kind of history.
Right, we'll save that for the book, right? But you guys, you come up with a really unique way in getting his DNA. I like the way how you guys set that up.
Thank you.
What is, yeah, we don't want to spoil everything because then there would be no reason to the book. So listen, we got to get the book. The summer's coming, folks. You want to go to the beach, you want to read a great book, true crime specifically. Real people who actually did these cases. It's always, to me, is always the most exciting kind of read. So, listen, we know that forensic investigative genealogy is changing the way we do things. I mean, we hear about it every day. We're even hearing it now. They're going to try to use it in the Guthrie case and every case that goes on now. FIGG comes into play, but people don't realize it's still expensive to get it done. Testing specifically.
Yeah, just and the amount of time it takes. They're working those family trees and just trying to build those out, and the amount of dead ends that they run into. So it is a science of its own. But there's certain people that are really, really good at it. Colleen, for instance. And so it's become a game changer in law enforcement, that if you have something sitting in CODIS in the National DNA database, you can say, okay, well, let's try familial DNA, or let's try FIG, this investigative genetic genealogy. And really, you can it's another avenue, another tool in the toolbox.
And how did the trial and go with the testimony and stuff like that? Because this was the first time you're using it, right? So this is like the kind of test case for the whole country. How did that go? Getting it through the pre-trial hearings.
Well, it was luckily we had great prosecutors that helped us. They took it from there. Because I always say the police put together, kind of like a package, and then they're the ones that the prosecutors kind of shuttle it through. And they did a great job of moving it. But the problem was it took 8 years for this case to go to trial. And that was 8 agonizing years for the families to wait. And there was a lot of what I call shenanigans, from on the part of the defense, given it was a capital murder case. They needed to methodically go through it. But 8 years just is hard to stomach. I mean, given COVID was in there too, that pandemic period. But I mean, it was, I just feel bad for them. And we were kind of on pins and needle saying exactly that, is we're hoping this all holds up and the guy doesn't walk, because that, everything we had an extremely bad individual who had a path of destruction in his life. For him to go free would be detrimental to society as a whole.
Yeah, and not only that, right? I mean, look at how big now the investigative genetic genealogy is around the country. Right? I mean, if you lose this case on that, we don't know if we even hear about it. We don't know if we solve the Golden State Killer and all these other cases that we're seeing, including possibility with this Rex Hillman out in Long Island, where he's been now arrested and charged with the murders of 7 people. So it's playing a huge role in not only homicides but missing persons and old sexual assaults. I mean, there's just so much they can do with it.
Yeah, it is massive. And if you had ever asked me, because I remember my father-in-law talking about, his family and ancestry.com and my dad, 23andMe, and I just never saw the application coming to law enforcement. But there was brilliant people like Colleen that were able to take it and apply it. And there's bad guys. A lot of these serial killers are so smart. I think people don't realize that they're really above average intelligence, and they're able to not get caught, not get convicted of anything else. So they basically stay out of the law enforcement's laser sights for a while. But genetic genealogy, we can track them down.
So when you guys, I'm assuming you executed a search warrant at his home.
Yeah, and in the book, I kind of refer to it as the house from hell, because it was he was a hoarder, and the stuff we found in his home was just painted a picture of his mental state and really what he was all about.
Right, and we'll leave those details for those that read the book. Now, I know you work with the Parents of Murdered Children organization.
I do, and I'm passionate about it. I'm a volunteer with it's called Ask the Experts, so people can write in and kind of. A lot of people have problems, with dialogue with the police because they'll call them and say that detective retired. They'll not get an answer. There's a lot of frustration, so I try to help them navigate that and figure out the best way to professionally have dialogue with detectives.
Yeah, and one of the things that I have found throughout my experience, maybe you've got the same thing. So if you're dealing with missing persons cases, specifically NamUs or unidentified human remains, I have found that the sergeants or above don't update the database when the detective gets promoted or retires or what have you, and then you got bad information even on the websites when people want to reach out to you and from across the country, and they're like, and you get somebody downstairs who says, Detective Smith, oh, that guy retired, and just hangs up, and I mean, you're missing out on some valuable information. So I mean, that's just one of the things that needs that attention from the police departments.
Yeah, we don't always do a good job of communicating. And I've always been an advocate of saying we just need we kind of set ourselves up sometimes for failure when we don't do things like that. All it would take was a volunteer a really good volunteer to say, hey, manage this, help the sergeant out, monitor this NamUs if you come across any detective that retires. We used it with tracking CODIS hits. We used a PhD volunteer because we had a problem. Detectives were, because they were so busy, they would forget about these CODIS hits. And we had a couple that were really, really probative, say on the murder weapon, that were kind of overlooked. And we're like, whoa, we can't have this happening. So we kind of had this, he was a PhD, literate volunteer, going through making sure that we had detectives authoring a supplement saying, hey, this is what I did on this particular CODIS hit as far as follow-up.
If you had an opportunity to make some policy or changes the way police departments across the country handle cold cases, what would be a couple of those things that you would address immediately?
Well, the staffing. So one of the lessons we learned, so we were kind of on cloud nine from solving this thing. We won a national award in Chicago. We didn't win awards, but we were excited. And then only to find out about a year and a half after we solved this, we got cut. We got dismantled as a squad when the wrong leadership took over. So to me, you have to protect cold case, and you kind of have to beef them up and make sure that they're adequately staffed. You can't have, a retired detective come in maybe once a week for 4 hours and poke around in a case. You have to have some buy-in, and you have to have this recipe, and you can't just have leaders coming in every 3 or 4 years and getting rid of cold case, because it's I've kind of developed my slogan that I trademarked is cold cases matter, because they do. I mean, there's families just waiting of missing persons, of homicides, of sexual assaults. They're just waiting for answers. And little do they know that if the wrong leader comes in and dismantles a squad, then nobody's working on a case. It's just gathering dust.
Yeah, and one of the main complaints, I'm sure you get it too, and I think you kind of mentioned, is that there's a lack of communication that the families feel, the victims feel, that the police don't give us a call. And my always pushback on that is like, we're not going to call you unless we have something, because we don't want to get you all excited and say, yeah, you went from the cold case squad, and they think that you're going to either you solved it or you're going to solve it. How do we deal with that as cold case investigators?
Well, I think, I had that same thing where you didn't necessarily want to call people. Now, there were certain family members that called in a lot. And I always told people, I'm like, call in as much as you want, but just understand that if you call in every day, that's going to bog down the system. So Let the detectives do their job, but don't be afraid to call a Zoom meeting or an in-person meeting to sit down and say, what's the status of my case? I think we as police officers and detectives owe that to families. And I would often, as a sergeant, get involved with that to just, to give them an update, because the last thing you want is for them to call and say, oh, yeah, Detective Smith retired 5 years ago and nobody has the case or even knows about the case. But Wiley said, we have so many cases, and I know you guys did, to be able to reach out on every single case every year within a certain amount of time would just bog us down. We'd need several more squads to handle that. It would just be an administrative nightmare.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, I mean, going forward, it should be easier per se, because all the cases are now digitized and we know where they are. It's not like you got to find the box and the evidence and all the other things that go along with it. So we hope this. I mean, we saw. I think was it about 2 years ago. I think we had a 51% clearance rate in the country. I mean, like you're flipping a coin if the case is going to get solved or not. That's pretty bad.
Right, and I think I was recently talking to some of the maybe newer detectives don't want to go out and pound the pavement like some of their predecessors did. Just kind of, they want to just sit behind a desk and maybe do, look at the cell phone data, and that's all fine. That needs to be done. There's so much new technology that they're looking at, but good old fashioned police work should not be ignored. So you have to kind of find a balance there.
Well, that might get worse, right? Because this generation that comes up, everything is on. They're looking at their phones. They're searching on Google and all the other things. But artificial intelligence is going to play a role in this too.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I've had a master's. I think she was either master's or PhD. Was doing a project on how cold cases can be improved with AI, and it's just phenomenal. If you could basically. It took us days to review a case. If AI could go in there and review a case and kind of spit out the who, what, where, why, when, how on a case, kind of summarize everything, that way a detective could really just get in the weeds immediately, that would be phenomenal. And I think it's coming. I hope law enforcement embraces it. I hope there's not, because unfortunately government's behind the curve on a lot of things. And, I hope they listen to people like us that care and are passionate and say, hey, we need to do this, and here's why.
Yeah, well, they rarely talk to the people that actually do this for a living and to get their input. So I'm sure you're familiar with that take on things. But I also want to see AI for a tool to be used where you could take, let's say, 10 or 15 cases and just input them into the system and say, are there any similarities? Are there any, common victims, common, friends, family members, whatever, and see if you can build cases, going forward, because a lot of times one case holds a clue to another one.
Yeah, and it would be awesome if you could do that on a statewide basis and or international or national basis, because there's a lot of jurisdictions where these serial killers are jumping to, and just bad guys are jumping to other jurisdictions. And what I found out is we don't always talk. We don't necessarily know what Tucson PD is doing or Flagstaff PD out here in Arizona. And that's kind of a failure of the city. It's not the detective's fault. It's more of, hey, managers saying, hey, this is, we should get this group together and actually have some kind of dialogue.
Yeah, or a way to share information in cases. You figured with all the technology we have now, this is totally doable. But meanwhile, we're still not doing it.
Yeah, we were sending. I laughed because we were sending faxes when I retired in 2021, and I'm like, why do we do faxes? Like, that's so old school. Let's do some kind of encrypted file sharing or something. I mean, can we get Google in here or somebody to help us? Just bizarre to me.
I'm surprised we're still not using Windows 98. Let's just keep it at that, right? Because they're always behind the technological 8 ball. I mean, people don't realize it, but police departments are so slow to adopt new technology.
We had detectives, instead of giving them a credit card when they traveled, we would give them cash, and the rental car agencies wouldn't accept it. And so you're sending detectives with maybe $1,000 or $2,000 worth of cash. And given they have a gun, they're traveling with a gun. But I mean, that's just setting cash as an accountant always sets people up for failure because of loss and that kind of thing. And you can't track it. So to me, just give them a credit card And so we fought tooth and nail from an investigative standpoint. Just give the detectives credit cards and you can track it. But that was shot down. So I hope since I retired, that's being done, but it maybe not.
Yeah. The process to get money to go on a trip was an absolute nightmare. Like same thing, they gave us cash. Like I said, you go to places and you send me to a foreign country with now I got to go to an exchange. Right. It's people don't get it. So Troy Hillman, author of Chasing Down the Zombie Hunter, the true story of a small town accountant, an elite group of detectives, and Arizona's most terrifying cold case. You can buy it on Amazon. The link has been shared in the chat. I know the chat is having some issues there tonight, but the links are still going through. And if you can pick up a copy in Barnes and Nobles or everywhere books are sold, are you doing any signings or anything in the near future?
I am. The Tucson Festival of Books down there near the University of Arizona. I'm fortunate they asked me to come down there and be on a panel for 2 days, and then so I'm going to be talking and signing. And then there's a convention, advocacy.com or con out in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and that's in April. So, and there's several more events that I'm attending. But my ultimate goal is to get the message out that cold cases matter, and that to me, this book is the poster child of why cold cases matter. Because we could have easily just said, "Oh, he's dead," let's move on, but we didn't.
And we're glad you guys didn't give up because you get this guy off the street. So everybody read the book, because we kind of touched on a lot of different things. We didn't really get into the nitty gritty of it. This is an unbelievable investigation. And this guy is a horrible individual. I mean, my God, when you read what he did to these young women, bad news. So, Troy, thank you for hanging out with us and talking to us about the book and about cold cases. I always enjoy doing this stuff. Troy, you hang out with me 1 second. We're going to say goodbye to everybody in the chat. Everybody have a great night. We'll talk to you soon.